Last week we started introducing Isaiah. That was a real quick class on Isaiah, wasn't it? And got into Jeremiah. But on Isaiah, his name, of course, means salvation of Jehovah. We noted that he was a native of Jerusalem and a close relation with the king. He's the son of Amoz, which means he shall strengthen or good courage. He was married with at least two sons, Sherab-Jashub and Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz. We noted that he was a well-educated man, and according to tradition, he was standing against the idolatry that King Manasseh was bringing in, and so Manasseh had him sawn asunder with a wooden saw. We also noted his character a little bit, but the character of Isaiah could probably be said about just about every one of the prophets. Bold, courageous, uncompromising, denouncing sin with the strongest of term. Yet on the other hand, he was tender and compassionate, deeply spiritual, reverent. So a lot of aspects that were there in relationship to his character. That brings us to what we were going to start tonight, and that is dealing with his call to be a prophet. And first off, we would notice that it was not hereditary, as the priestly office was. We talked a little bit about that last week. We also noted that prophets, while received a direct call from the Lord in their work, which would be unlike some of the others. The prophets came from various vocations, we noted. Some of royal blood, Isaiah, Daniel, Zephaniah. Some were priests. We mentioned Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and probably Zechariah. Amos was a sheep herder. But the majority of them, we just don't know where or what their vocation was. His inaugural vision. Someone turn over to Isaiah, the 6th chapter. Isaiah chapter 6. And Elwood, would you read that for us? The whole chapter.
Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth, and said, Lo, this hath touched my lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord say, Whom shall I send, and who shall go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and tell this people, Hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and covet, convert, and be healed. Then said I, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until the cities be wasted without inhabit, and the house without man, and the land be utterly desolate. And the Lord hath removed him from men far away, and there be a great forsaken in the midst of the land. But yet in it shall be a kith, and it shall return, and shall be eaten, and a heel tree, and an oak tree, whose substance is in them, when they cast their leaves, so the holy seed shall be the substance thereof.
Okay. That is, to me, a great passage. The entire chapter, really. But we see the time frame of this calling, the year that Isaiah died. So that's the time frame in which Isaiah was called to this prophetic office. In the vision, he first sees the holiness and majesty of God. Saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high lifted up, and here's the seraphim crying out, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The holiness, the majesty, the greatness of God is seen by Isaiah. This causes Isaiah to realize the corruption of God's people, including himself. Notice in verse 5, Woe is me, I am undone, for I am a man of unclean lips. I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Now, why did he come to that realization? Because he saw the holiness and the majesty of God. That's why. I wonder what effect it would have on a lot of Christians today to see that vision. Now, of course, we can't, but we can read about it and read the effects that it had on Isaiah, and we can see other occasions where they saw, if not the majesty of God himself, the effects of his greatness. But it always seems to produce this effect. The majesty of God causing them to recognize their own wickedness and sin.
Manoah only saw an angel and he's afraid he's going to die. He's scared.
Yeah. There's a lot of those illustrations, Dale. That's what we were saying. Well, I was wondering where you were.
I thought it was 6.
Only an hour off. We're in Isaiah 6 going through that vision that Isaiah saw in his call to the prophetic office. He is, of course, cleansed by the seraphim going over and finding getting a live coal and touching his lips, or his mouth and his lips, saying, "Your iniquity is taken away." And then the call specifically, Lord says, shall I send, and who will go for us? Should we even notice the us there? Does that tell us anything?
Yeah. Where you at?
Well, that would be in verse, that's verse 8 in particular. Who will go for, not me, but for us? Godhead. That's what it's showing. There's more than one that is the Lord here. And of course, Isaiah's response, "Here am I, send me." I think we sing a song along that line every once in a while, don't we? But I wonder how many of us sing the truth in that. Because will we go? Will we go across the street to our neighbor, or next door to our neighbor? Will we go across town? Will we go? How much are we really willing to go? But Isaiah does say he's willing to go. We also see in this call the certainty and the awful judgment of God's people. You're going to speak. They're going to be destroyed. There's a destruction coming. Notice verse 11, until the cities be wasted without inhabitant, the houses without a man, the land be utterly desolate. There is an awful judgment coming upon Israel. So we see that certainty and the awfulness of that judgment of God. We also see in it the salvation of a remnant. Now, what is a remnant? Leftover? Remainder? Paul, you started to say a partial of something. In this case, it is a small group that would be left over, that would be reserved or spared from the destruction. You see that in verse 13, but yet it shall be a tenth, and it shall return and shall be eaten. So there's a tenth. What is it? He wasn't saying it would be 1/10 literally of the people, but he's showing that there's going to be a small group that would be the seed of new Israel, of a new Israel, in relationship to them coming and being returned from Babylonian captivity. Then one other aspect that is impressive in relationship to this vision that Isaiah saw and his call to this prophetic office, and that is that from the outset, from this point in which he is being called, he knows that his work and that his warnings are not going to avail anything. They're going to be fruitless. Now then, Well, probably a lot of us, and probably he would have been as well. How many of us would have been willing, we'd be more prone to say, well, Lord, if it's not going to do any good, why do it? Now, wouldn't that be the attitude of so many today?
We're in that position today.
Well, you got ahead of me a little bit, but yes, you're right. We're in that position today. We go out, we try and teach people. Do we go out and teach people? And generally we know at the beginning, it's not going to avail anything. It's not going to help. So we don't do it, right? Now that's the end result a lot of times of what we do. Why go teach them if it's not going to do any good? They're not going to hear, so why do it? Well, Isaiah is being told they're not going to hear. They're not going to listen. Notice this in verse 10. Lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their heart, and convert and be healed. In other words, they're not.
I think that's one of the things that's taught by the parable of the tare, of the talents. Parable of what?
The talents.
Five went and did the other, the two, the one. Like people are today, well, we was not gonna do any good anyway, so we better.
So just hide it. Don't let anyone, don't expose it to anything.
Somebody says, well, we can't do, we've done that over, it won't work.
Yeah.
Well, we still do it.
That's the thing. We still do it. Yes, and generally that statement, well, we've done that before, is a feeble attempt to say, why do it again? So let's not do this because we've tried it before, and it didn't work before, so why should we do it? Well, you could ask Isaiah, why do it? Well, because God said to do it.
And there's always that, looks like that tent.
There's going to be that remnant that is there. Jason.
I was just thinking about, Paul saying, I planted and Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. And how we don't know what the result's going to be when we plant the seed of God's word in somebody's heart. Because I'm thinking about Jonah. How Jonah go preach to Nineveh, what? Say what? So he goes the other direction toward,
Yeah, toward Tarsus.
And he was so much less faithful than Isaiah.
Yeah.
The results were far greater. So I'm always
And-
thinking about that.
In fact, Jonah had a 100% success rate in that. Whereas God is telling Isaiah, you're going to have a 0 success rate, but go do it anyway. Notice his question, Lord, how long? How long am I going to have to do this? Well, basically, he's told your entire life until the destruction comes.
How long is Isaiah supposed to live?
Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes. But, well, let's see. We, last week, we mentioned that according to tradition, he was 90 years old when he withstood Manasseh's decrees. Now, that's according to tradition. But basically, your entire life. And it's not going to be successful except from the standpoint that God told him to do it. But that's his call to the prophetic office. Just a marvelous passage, as I said. one that we need to really learn more and more from all the time. So any questions about that? Okay. Now, there. The book itself now. It was written by one whose name is on the book, Isaiah. That one's not hard to figure out, is it? If we were giving a test and I asked that question, everybody would get that one right, I think. It was written by Isaiah. To whom was it written, though? Well, from a general standpoint, to the Jews. That one's not too hard, but being more specific, it was written to Judah, the southern kingdom, primarily. And understand the terminology that's found in the Bible. When you're talking about Israel, who are you talking about?
The middle part of the country, Samaria in the middle. It serves around it, north and south of that.
It depends on the time frame. Israel can refer to all of the people, children of Israel. It can, prior to the division of the kingdom, after the death of Solomon, it can refer to Israel as a whole, the entire nation. After the division of the kingdom, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, the northern kingdom is referred to as Israel. The southern kingdom that followed Rehoboam and stayed with him in the Davidic line, those two tribes were called Judah. So understand, after that time, if you read Israel, it's talking about that northern kingdom of Judah. It's many times used, just the term Ephraim is used, representative of the entirety of that people. So understand, though, but Isaiah is primarily written to the southern kingdom. The time covered in the writing. Well, this is a little bit difficult now. We're going to say 50 years. Some say as much as 69 years. So take your pick. Would be, if you're taking just the 50 years, it's considered from 740 BC to 690 BC. If you're taking that 69 years, you move the time frame up a little bit to 759, but the ending of it would still be at 690. So it's pretty much agreed 690 is the ending. It's just, when did it begin as to the time covered in it. Well, I said, if you're taking the 50 years, it's 740 to 690. That's a period of 50 years. That's BC, not AD. And thus, 69 years, if you take it that time frame, then you're talking about 759 to 690. So, the reason that it's listed there and for its specific location, it's listed among the prophetic books as to our setting forth the way in which we divide it. It would be the first of what we refer to as the major prophets. It's interesting. It's not the longest book, though. Not even the longest of the prophetic books, as far as words. Chapters, it's the longest prophetic book. How many chapters are in it? 66. Okay. 66 books or chapters. As far as the number of words, Book of Psalms is the longest, which should not be surprising. The second longest would be Jeremiah. The third longest, nope. Ezekiel is the third longest. Fourth longest would be, nope, not Isaiah. We're going to get there. No, Genesis. Well, no, we started with Psalms, so that's not one of the prophetic books. So, but it's Psalms, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Genesis, then Isaiah. As far as the number of words, and we're talking about in the King James. But I would imagine it would be pretty much the same in other translations. But so Isaiah actually is the third longest of the prophetic books and the fifth longest total as far as number of words. It is important for us to remember that the book is not chronologically arranged. The Bible is not chronologically arranged. There are some Bibles that have been published through the years that supposedly advertise themselves as a chronologically arranged Bible. I see those and I laugh, really. Because it's almost foolish to think that you can chronologically arrange the Bible. If you were trying to do that, you would start out with Genesis, and Genesis chapters 1 through 11. The only thing is you would also have to work in 1 Chronicles during that time frame, because 1 Chronicles starts out with Adam as well. But after the 11th chapter, thereabouts, you would have to read the book of Job, because that's the time frame that Job would be in. Then you would continue on and you get to Moses. Well, Moses wrote at least one of the Psalms. So where in Moses' life are you going to put that psalm? Don't know. A lot of the prophetic books, there is simply no way to determine when it was written. So where are you going to put those books if you're arranging it chronologically?
How do you determine who was the writer of the Psalm?
The writer of Psalms, several of them have a statement at the beginning as to who wrote it.
It says Moses wrote this.
Yeah, the 90th Psalm, I believe, was written by Moses. If you go back, of course, the first 40, 50, maybe more of the Psalms, just about all of those were written by David. He wrote the majority of them. I believe it's close to half of them he wrote. And then, for some reason, 72 sticks in my mind that he wrote. Then others wrote the others. So some of them Solomon, and other individuals, Moses we mentioned. So there would be, that's the way, primarily what we would call a heading. And by the way, those headings, if you look at the Hebrew text, the heading of the Psalms is the first verse. If you try and figure out our verses and you don't realize that, and you're looking at a Hebrew interlinear, the verses are all wrong. Well, it's because that first verse is actually what we have as the header. So, I didn't realize that for a while, and I kept, this isn't what it's supposed to be. So, and I will also state in relationship to those headers, as we might refer to them, Jesus put his stamp of approval on them when he talked about David writing, "The Lord said to my Lord," in Matthew 22 and the last few verses, that David said, "The Lord said unto my Lord." But he said that it's a heading of the 110th Psalm. So basically Jesus is saying that is accurate. How'd you get me off on that? Got me chasing rabbits, but Bible's not chronologically arranged. Someone in a Facebook group asked a question about a passage, and I don't even remember what it was, but I don't remember the passage. I remember the situation where it talks about David being called to Saul because David would be able to play an instrument and soothe his emotions. And then in the next chapter it talks about Saul did not know David, didn't know who he was. Well, how could that be? Well, because the Bible is not chronologically arranged. And they were asking about it. That sounds about right. 16 and 17, 1 Samuel, but I don't remember. But basically, it's more topically arranged many times. And he had gotten to a point where he's talking about here's Saul's problem and here's what they did to alleviate the problem. Now then he goes back in the next chapter to start it back before that happened, is what he was doing. But the point is, it's not chronologically arranged. Well, Isaiah itself is not chronologically arranged. It's arranged more from the standpoint of topical subjects. So as we study that, we need to remember it. Then the name, Holy One of Israel. Now, I don't know of anyone who really has stated this about Isaiah, that becomes his moniker. But I'll say it. So if no one else has, I'll kind of identify it. To a great extent, this phrase, Holy One of Israel, becomes his moniker. He uses the phrase 25 times in the book. In the rest of the Bible combined, or the Old Testament in particular, it's used 6 times. Now, he uses it 25 all by himself. I kind of wonder, with that phrase, the Holy One of Israel, if it's not referring back to his call, Remember the seraphim? What did they say? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. And now then, Isaiah repeatedly using that phrase, Holy One of Israel. Maybe it goes back to his remembrance of that call. Dale?
It says in Isaiah 57:15, thus saith thy high and holy one that inhabiteth eternity, your name is holy, and it goes on.
A lot of times it's dealing with His holiness, the holiness of God. So it is an important concept that we find in Isaiah, or moniker, if I can use that term. Okay, some key concepts in the book. And we could begin with the aspects of true religion. He set forth what true religion was in relationship to Israel and what they need to be doing. To a certain extent, this could be said of all the prophets again, or just about all of them. Setting forth that aspect. Here's true religion. Now then, when we come over in the New Testament, we find out what true religion is as well. It's that which is, as Jesus said, worshiping the Father in spirit and in truth. Well, obviously, in Isaiah, part of the problems that he faces is idolatry. And so he is fighting against idolatry, and in that, true religion is worshiping God, not idols. He also, in relationship to that true religion, many times it's dealing with the injustices of people. And so you're dealing with, here's the translation of that true religion into life. If your religion does not translate into life as to what you're doing and how you're living, of what value is it? Is it really a true religion if it doesn't affect your life? It has to. And so Isaiah is dealing with aspects of true religion as to what is true and how they live their life and who they are to worship in regards to that true religion. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father. Visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and keep himself unspotted from the world. You can say that in relationship to, again, there's true religion. What does it do? It affects your life. Visit, that is, helping out those who are fatherless and widows, and keeping himself unspotted from the world. So the religion affects the life. And that's true whether we're dealing with Christianity, whether you're dealing with Judaism. The religion affects one's life. And I just noticed a while ago that should be true religion, not truth. Sometimes I get a little ahead and don't proofread quite as well as I should on those things. Huh? Well, yes, but it's not proper English. So, and we try to have proper English in this, sometimes at least. Yeah, we're in the South, so we don't worry about English. Another key concept is the destruction of sin, or destruction because of sin, the captivity, and thus return. Because of sin, you're going to be destroyed. And we will also notice it'll be next week, Isaiah deals with foreign nations as well. Many of the foreign nations in that time frame and around them. That principle, destruction because of sin, is just as applicable to those foreign nations as it was to Israel itself. Now then, in relationship to Israel, they are going to be carried off into captivity, but there's also going to be a return. And let me just state, a lot of times the return is seen in the messianic promise that's going to come. Isaiah, the 7th chapter, and we're not going to get into this tonight as to the details, but there's a time frame. Here's these two nations that are going to come, and Ahaz is worried about them, and he's basically being told by God, you don't need to worry about them, because, and here's Isaiah 7:14, that promise of a virgin-born child or son who's going to be Emmanuel, who is God with us. That promise was something that was way down in the future. Why did it tell Ahaz? Actually, it wasn't to Ahaz, though. It was to the house of David. Why did it tell the house of David, you don't have to worry about those two kings? Why? Because they're going to be destroyed so that the seed can come, that Messiah. Now then, there's more to it and more involved in that in Isaiah 7. When we get there, we'll spend some time with that. But that shows the idea of a return. There's going to be, yes, destruction. You're going to be carried away into captivity. But there's a Messiah that's coming, so there has to be a return. And so he deals with that return as well. We mentioned remnant. That again is a key concept. It deals with that return. That there's going to be a small group that is left. A remnant that is going to be saved. The majority of the people, they're going to be destroyed. Destruction because of sin. There's that concept. But there's going to be a small group that will be saved, that will not be destroyed. They're going to be spared.
That's why Abraham didn't care if he killed Isaac.
That's why Abraham what?
Was willing to kill Isaac. And you
What?
Isaac.
Through Isaac.
Something's got to change.
Abraham willing to destroy or to slay his son Isaac. Why? Well, he believed that God would even raise him from the dead. Why? Because God said through Isaac, your seed's going to come. The seed's going to come. And all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. So there had to be either God sparing his life in some way, however we don't know, he didn't know, or God raising him from the dead. Because God said he's the one. So he could believe God in that regard. Well, the same principle in relationship to a remnant. God promised there's going to come a Messiah. Thus, we know that till that Messiah comes, the nation of Israel is going to be spared. Now, that doesn't mean all of the people. In fact, the majority of people at this time were going to be destroyed. But there's got to be a remnant that's spared in order for the Messiah to come. We'll stop there and then look at some others, Lord willing, next week.